we think about advisory services to the overall PwC picture, it's a key piece of our business today, and it's a key growth engine, probably the key growth engine for our firm going forward in terms of looking at the total picture. Roughly today, when you look at advisory, it's a $10 billion business for PwC, which is a very formidable business in any context. And then when you take it and look at it in the context of India itself, and you look at the number of people, we have roughly 4,000 people in India that serve both the domestic market and serve other foreign markets in support of delivery of services. So we see both the advisory business in its totality and the business specifically in the India market is key to our ongoing growth strategy. And predominantly serving clients that, whether they're domestic today or global, have an interest in continuing to expand their business in their domestic markets and their international. Yeah, so when we talk about advisory services, there's three very broad categories. And the first one is you have consulting, which I'll come back to in a minute, but then you have deals activity, and then finally you have forensic services. So those are the three that we look after. Within consulting, we think of it from management consulting, technology consulting, and risk consulting. And then within deals, we look at it from the entire channel of the inorganic growth strategy of a company. And then forensics is focused on investigative support services as well as licensing, compliance, and those types of activities. Without a doubt, we've really have set out some time ago, about 6 years ago, where we said we wanted to be the firm that distinguished itself of being relevant on strategy through execution. You hear a number of firms talk about that today, but the talking about it and executing on it are two different things. And so over the last 6 years, we've been on a very purposeful mission to build out the capabilities to go anywhere from very pinpoint execution services to the full strategy through execution, and we've done that both organically and through acquisitions.
And I would add, Miles, that for us here in India, the acquisition strategy which we've been on for the last 6 years is every one of those acquisitions that was led globally had a significant piece of business here in India. So for us, the Indian practice got to benefit from each one of those acquisitions by adding some very talented people that not only serve our Indian national companies, but also our multinational companies. So we were a beneficiary in a big way of the overall growth strategy within the firm and advisory.
We serve effectively every industry sector, okay? But if you think of financial services as a very broad sector, we service that very actively, and the further the global reach that an organization has, oftentimes the more help they need in order to understand unique and specialized markets and how to compete in those markets. Another example of that is the oil and gas industry is a very rich sector for us in terms of how we practice. But at the same time, when you talk about bricks and mortar or kind of nuts and bolts manufacturing, supply chain is a very critical matter today, whether you're the manufacturer putting into a supply chain to get to distributors or whether you're a distributor trying to get goods through. So I wouldn't necessarily conclude that there's one or two industries that are the predominant share of our services, because we've got such a critical mass that we're relevant and have scale in all of the industries that we play in.
But very true. I would say that we here in the Indian advisory practice have the same thing, but we are focused on a certain set of industries where we see more growth and more potential and actually more needs from our clients. So, for example, you mentioned financial services, retail, pharmaceutical, healthcare, entertainment and media are the big ones for us here in India, where we're putting a lot of effort behind what we do in those sectors because of the activity and the nature of the needs of our clients in those sectors.
there's an element of both. Okay, there's a broad framework, but I think what's important to emphasize, and to your point, every market is a bit different, whether you're looking at that market from a sector perspective or a country geographic perspective. The markets are different. So you come with a framework of how you go about solving a problem, which gets to the strategy of execution point. I need to understand the industry sector. I need to understand the local government's laws and regulations. I need to understand the customer base. And then I also need to understand when you think about the processes and the technology to enable. And so that full stack of capabilities is needed. So that's the commonality. What's unique is really how the client thinks about the way that they want to compete in the markets they want to serve. So then you tailor the advice and consultation and the execution to that client's specific needs in terms of how they intend to compete in a particular market.
I would also just add that for us here in the Indian advisory business too, is we look at the multinational companies differently than we look at the Indian nationals, because the needs of those two companies are different. So for example, the multinationals operating here in India, there's always regulatory and compliance issues that need to be dealt with, so we do a lot of that. There's always issues around supply chain and moving goods around the country and in and out of the country, so we do a lot of that. And then, you know, for example, the Indian nationals, we do a lot of IT technology work for their businesses and stuff. So it's very different on the services that we provide to those two sets of companies, because their needs are different.
The first is, in a world economy where for the most part, GDPs have been under a bit of stress, okay? Developed countries and now in the emerging markets, you've seen some stress around GDP growth. The question is, how do you compete in a market where you're not getting robust GDP growth? And so clients are very much asking us about how to compete in those types of situations. And so there's a bit of a very intense competition for customer. So our customer business has been growing significantly. And it's not just which customers to go after, but it's how do you deliver your service in a way that actually delights the customer? Because it's the game right now is getting the customers and giving them the products and services they want in a very aggressive way. And then if you can do that, the second piece of the equation is managing the cost structure in a most efficient way without compromising what it takes to delight the customer. So between those two, those are the two things that are really driving a big piece of our business from a global perspective right now.
I think, Miles, exactly on that, playing off what's happening globally, and you think about what's happening here in India, you know, with what we'll call the leapfrogging of the technologies, you know, the whole mobile world that everybody's in. And so if you think about mobile banking or some of these applications, you know, when we were younger, we used to go to the bank, right? And we would sign checks and do that. Now, nobody goes to the bank, right? All your transactions are done over your phone. So how do the banks relate back to their customers and provide services? So it's very unique in India, because the way things have developed here, there's this leapfrogging that's going on that will take place here. So it's an interesting spot for our customers, our clients to be in, to try to figure out those technologies and hold on to their customers and expand that customer base at the same time. So it's very interesting in the Indian context for these trends.
The way that we tend to advise governments is we tend to advise governments mostly on how they run some of their own programs. Okay, so not necessarily on what their policy ought to be, but on, once they have a policy, how they ought to implement that policy. So and it varies from country to country depending on the way the government interacts with advisors. But for the most part, in the larger economies, we are working with governments around how they execute programs. And in many cases, it's how do they actually support the financial systems in those countries.
And I would also say here in India too, for us, we do the same type of thing, but we also execute a lot of projects, whether railway development, construction, you know, stuff like that. We're very involved with certain aspects of the government on those types of projects. And, you know, smart ID and other things like that. We're very involved with a lot of the actual execution of the things that are trying to get done.
You know, that's one of many things, obviously, that we do, but it's a hot topic because, for the most part, we're operating in increasingly uncertain times in an environment where change is occurring at a faster and faster rate. And so having the ability to see the changes that might affect you and how you might respond to those on a very proactive basis is a big piece of what the enterprise risk management is. And we, in many respects, have moved beyond the traditional thinking of identifying the risk and saying, can you really build a resilient organization? Because you will never be able to identify all of the risks that will come your way. The question is, do you have the fortitude and the resilience to respond to things that you never thought of before? And companies that are good at that are those that succeed in uncertain times. Yeah, I mean, I think I'll go back to one example I'll use is in the financial crisis that went through. There were some institutions that you didn't hear about being on the front page of the newspaper. It's because they had very good risk management programs. Okay, because what you hear about are the ones that run into trouble. Okay, and so that's one area. The other is, I mean, let's face it. Mike alluded to a few minutes ago about some of the technologies. We're seeing industries and companies be disrupted literally on a daily basis by innovative technologies, and those companies that identify very quickly the technologies that will completely change the way an industry operates, those companies, that's management of risk because they're avoiding being disinterrupted by somebody else. And so again, that we see companies doing that regularly in terms of being on the forefront of thinking what life will be like tomorrow as opposed to how they're doing it today.
And I can give you an example of a project that we did with the technology bent for a state within India where the state had the suspicion that goods were being moved around through supply chain efforts to avoid taxation within that state. So we were able to apply our technology and some analytics tools to that to actually help the government to identify where those transactions were taking place and to provide additional revenue to the government when those things were found out. So it's one of the examples of the type of work that we do.
Yeah, so there's a few things on analytics that I think are important. One is we go out and we get our own proprietary data to support our consulting and our advice to clients. But importantly, we help clients build the capability to make better use out of their own data to drive analytics so that they can see what's going on in their business. And if you think of the use of applications and other technologies, I talked about the innovative technologies, the use of the cloud to use data to treat customers differently. You know, I happen to have, I have a wearable on me right now where I track my steps and that type of thing. That's a very simple example of how data and analytics are changing the way customers interact with the product and with the service that companies are providing. And we do that for companies routinely. I think what we see happening and will continue to happen is the way business gets conducted and the way business models operate are being changed by innovative technology, and the rate of innovation is accelerating. It's not slowing down. And so companies need to change themselves more and more frequently in order to stay relevant. And you can look at any industry and look at who the players were 10 or 15 years ago and who the primary dominant players are today. And in many industries, you see that has changed dramatically. And in many cases, it's because technology has changed the way you execute the business activities. And that's going to continue. And as long as change is alive and well, there'll be an important role for consultants and advisors to help both advise and execute that change. And
we do a lot of that here in India. So to play on what Miles just mentioned is the amount of change that's out there that the customers don't understand the technologies that are relevant for their own business. So, every technology player will go to a client and say, we have the solution for you. But there's 10 people coming to say they have the solution for you. So we help companies in the beginning say, okay, what is the best technology based on the business strategy? So as long as these as Miles said, as long as these technologies keep changing at a very rapid pace, it creates confusion in the marketplace for our clients, and they seek us out to say, hey, what's the best answer for me as a strategy around this stuff. And then you have the big, if you have the big things coming in like the cloud and other things like that, then it gets really interesting for clients to try to decide what data do they put in the cloud and all of those other types of things. So
so let me just put a finer point on that. Today, there's 3.5 connected devices per person in the world. By 2020, the estimates are that's going to be 6.5 connected devices per person. So it's nearly doubling up the amount of connected devices per person in this world. That's just one simple anecdote in terms of the volume of change that we're looking at and how it's going to affect businesses. And so we're routinely consulting on how the role of digital enabled assets change the way the customer interacts, whether you're talking about food, your automobile, or any other service that you're looking for.
You know, over the past 3 weeks, every C-level executive that I've spent time with and talked about are truly excited about some potential change. So, you know, we look at, and all of them are excited about that in the context of their own business. So they feel like they've weathered whatever they've weathered, what, you know, we can comment on what that is or what it isn't, but I would say that everybody is everyone's very, very optimistic about the future. So we look at that and say, okay, we're growing very, very healthy here in India, you know, plus 20% next year. And if this change comes about, which we think, and the companies free up a little bit, it's only going to accelerate our growth. So, and our strategy to stay with our clients during the rough times, to be there with them, will pay off for us when the things start to open up. Our client base here, from both a multinational perspective and an Indian base, is very, very healthy. But I think I know what we're looking to do is deepen those relationships within those clients in some of these newer areas or different areas. So we're expanding the client base, but we're trying to go longer and deeper within the current clients that we have, just to continue to build those relationships. You know, this country is very much relationship driven, and staying with your clients over the long haul, good and bad, is what we're going to continue to focus on. But we're extremely bullish on the overall market.
Yeah, what I would add is, and I think it's an important piece of what our strategy is from a global advisory perspective, which is we talk about strategy to execution and being able to deliver that. We recently completed an acquisition of Strategy & which is formerly Booz & Co. And what that acquisition has done for us is it's allowed us to be very relevant on where do you think about going to make money and how you're going to make money. And then we have the execution capability that we built out over the last 6 years. And what we see is organizations are looking for the ability from idea generation on how I should go grow my business to actual execution. And there's not very many firms that actually have the capability to deliver on that. And in a highly competitive market that's very fast moving, having one firm that you can go to and you can get your tax advice, you can get your strategy advice, you can get the execution that you need and get all that delivered, it's critical because speed matters. And we believe that we're the firm that's put together the capability to help accelerate the speed to compete in this market. So the answer to the first question about adding more people, absolutely we're going to continue to add more people. I often, you know, talk to folks about the importance of part of what we do. We have a societal purpose to create jobs. Okay, and we take that seriously. And so we're going to continue to create jobs and employ people. And the types of services that we provide, we've got the roadmap down on those services that I talked about earlier, the consulting, the deals business, and then the forensics business. And we're going to continue to just broaden our footprint in terms of the clients that we serve and our existing customers that we serve, to provide more of our services that we provide to them just with the current client base.
And here in India, we are significantly expanding our resource base, both at a college entry level and also at a senior higher level from other places, including we're looking at multiple acquisitions and things like that too. So we will continue to add in a very serious way to our workforce.
I'm going to focus, they're all three growing, okay, but for different reasons. And the way that we look at it is that the management consulting business is growing because organizations are trying to address how they transform themselves and getting that transformational change done. That's what we do through our consulting business, by taking very strong and deep management consultants, teaming them with technology consultants, and delivering on that. When you look at the deals side of the channel of our services, what's important about deals is almost everybody is looking where they can go grow, and that growth oftentimes includes inorganic acquisitions. So in order to execute those inorganic acquisitions, we have the team that's focused on deals, which includes tax advice, accounting advice, where I go do the deal, getting the deal executed, integrating the deal, post-deal integration. And then finally, when we talk about our forensics and our risk business, that's about having the discipline around executing in accordance with laws and regulations and showing good corporate stewardship. And so for different reasons, all three of those are growing businesses for us. So we're very pleased with the businesses we've chosen to be in, and we see all three of them as growth engines. We don't see any of them in terms of being a flat or a down business. We're very comfortable with where we're at with those three businesses.
I think it's, from just a regulatory standpoint, I think what we've been telling our clients is hang on, hang in there. We think things are going to get better. We think things are going to open up. We tell our multinational clients that have difficulties here in India with certain aspects of it, say, okay, we think it's going to get better, stay the course, stay with India, those types of things. So I don't know, from a global perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I commented on it a minute ago about the speed of change that's occurring. I think you have to be really careful getting too complacent with what you're doing today, and you need to be prepared to actually adapt to change, because what I can tell you is the world around us is changing very fast, and so being on your front foot a bit, if you will, in terms of being prepared for change and proactively dealing with it would be the piece of advice that I would give, because you're either growing or shrinking, and you're most often better off on the growing side of that equation.
I don't know if I'd call it a problem. I would call it more of a concern of the unknown. Just the things that have happened to some of the multinationals, that operate, in our country here have, everybody knows the stories, including the latest one where, Starbucks was trying to get some raw materials into the country here, and they'd been bringing it in for 2 years, and all of a sudden it got stopped, and for whatever reason, and then the courts overruled it and the stuff was allowed to come in. So companies are resilient around India, but there is just a little bit of what we call fatigue, and concern just about the unknown. So those situations are out there for sure.